Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Or I guess it's good morning still, getting close to it at any rate. So this is modernization, mapping legacy systems, and we have a great panel today to talk about the issues and challenges of being able to retain your investment in existing systems and still, move your technology into the next generation. So what I'd like to do is just introduce my panel. I've got a little echo here, but I'll start right down at the end. We have Roger Moon. Roger's a solutions architect and fellow, SAIC. He's a seasoned solutions architect, program manager, and technical fellow with an outstanding combination of technical, business, and leadership skills. He has 25 years of technical and management experience from Fortune 500 companies, the US Air Force, and an internet software startup. He's a disciplined creative technology executive with a broad industry understanding and experience that spans private and public sector. And currently, he leads SAIC's legacy system modernization practice. Next to Roger is Jeremy Wiltz. He's the Assistant Director, Information Technology Enterprise Services for the FBI and the Department of Justice. He is the Assistant Director of the IT Enterprise Services Division within the FBI's Information and Technology Branch. Mr. Wiltz oversees both the IT Enterprise Operations section and the IT Customer Services section and is directly responsible for the overall customer experience across the FBI IT enterprise. He joined the FBI in August 2007, bringing with him over 21 years of professional and technical experience in engineering and deploying IT systems in the U.S. government, including serving as the Chief Information Officer for the Central Intelligence Agency's Deputy Director for Community Management, where his focus was on developing and maintaining the financial system for the intelligence community budget. Next to Jeremy is Tarazia Martin, government and industry technology expert. She is a senior government leader with over 20 years of strategic technology and management expertise. She has served in pivotal roles within the government sector throughout the years, such as Chief Information Officer, Strategic Human Capital Plan Director, Program Manager, as well as IT Acquisition Director and Networks and Data Center Operations Director at Treasury and at DHS. She has served across multiple federal market sectors such as the IRS, Treasury, GSA, DHS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Agency, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and the CIA. Tarazia is currently serving within the Office of HUD's OCIO as Senior Technical Advisor, Enterprise Planning, Cost Analysis, and Change Management. And next to me is Robert Fernandez, Branch Chief Enterprise Information Manager for the FAA. Mr. Fernandez is the Enterprise Information Management Manager within the FAA's Solution Delivery Directorate. He has 17 years experience in implementation of application systems in the oil and gas, natural gas, finance, and aviation industries. Mr. Fernandez has been with the FAA for 11 years and served recently with the FAA EIM team to provide internal, external data access to aeronautical navigational data, create enterprise data control systems, and supports the aeronautical data consumption and capture initiatives for unmanned aircraft systems and other air traffic systems. Wow, what an awesome panel. Okay. So what I would like to do, by the way, I'm Deborah Danielson. I am SVP M&A Strategy and a distinguished engineer at CA Technologies. I work in the half in the office of the CTO and half in our corporate development organization. And I blend technology strategy and my love of shopping to look for companies for us to acquire and ensure that they are the right technology fit for CA. Okay. So with that, I would like to start out by asking each one of the panelists to talk a little bit about their experience in modernizing legacy systems. And I will start with, on my right-hand side, Robert.
Sure. So as Deborah mentioned, I'm with the FAA, and when I think about IT modernization within the FAA, I think a lot of folks in the room can relate to the emerging trends with UAS, unmanned aerial systems. Willing to bet there's a lot of hobbyists out here that already owns aerial systems, unmanned aerial systems at home. And so one of the unique challenges for the FAA is to be able to safely manage that unmanned traffic. There's a lot of public pressure for us to be able to provide access to airspace for these unmanned systems. You think about the potential applications of unmanned aerial systems, right? There's military, there's law enforcement. One particular use case that came recently that I feel that I can get behind their mission is the delivery of burritos to people, universities. I think about the cell tower technician sitting 200 feet up in the air and gets hungry for a burrito. So that's a mission that I think the FAA can get behind. Or I can get behind. So you think about that unique challenge to be able to provide access to airspace that's controlled by the FAA or by the government. And you want to do it in such a way that's fast, that's safe, and with quality, because nobody likes a stale burrito, right? So you want to make sure that's quick. So when you think about those use cases, our legacy systems, when we look back at our legacy systems and the demand from industry, they want data fast, they want data quality, and they want it, from the agency perspective, we want to provide it securely. So those are some of the unique challenges that we're faced with our IT systems. And when I look back at our systems behind our firewall, I'm looking at legacy systems that don't necessarily meet the needs of industry. Industry is asking for formats like GeoJSON. They want to be able to do callbacks. They want to do API access. Well, when I look at some of our systems that we're currently providing data to the airlines and things like that, we're providing it in flat files and text-based in PDFs, or we're providing it in errant coding for avionics boxes. Doesn't necessarily meet the needs of the UAS industry. So that's when we start to look at modernization of our legacy systems, but at the same time, meeting the public demand for data today. So that's where IT modernization of our legacy systems at the data layer is our approach and strategy. We call it EIM, data as a service, where you can access open data to the data layers, and then we can format that securely outside the firewall in the formats that industry is looking for. So that's kind of the approach and use case. One of the use cases, I think, for the FAA that I think folks can relate to.
Thanks, Roger. Tarazia.
Hi, I'm Tarazia Martin, and I've been with the government for 32 years, quite a long time. And as part of the different roles that I've played, as Deborah mentioned, I've had the fortunate opportunity to work for 6 agencies. And each of those roles have been in the technology arena, where we've looked at legacy systems and O&M issues, and certainly new development investments into new technologies, such as the ones that were just mentioned. What our challenge has been, and what I've seen in my tenure, is that we frequently get locked up around the cost issue. Meaning, if I don't have development dollars in my federal budget, I can't really invest in a new contract, which would allow me to get new capability in my organization. What we're now learning, and with all of your help, is that focusing on the O&M, re-engineering those O&M systems, actually re-looking at how we can leverage them, particularly from a data perspective, is where we see the opportunity. And that's why this panel is so important, because a big part of what we need to do is have you help educate government and have us educate you about how we can actually take those legacy systems, modernize them, and really get to a place of capability for our mission owners. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
Jeremy.
Morning. So you've probably all seen movies about and shows about the FBI. 24 comes to mind, those kinds of shows. So really, we're completely modern already. We don't really have any legacy, and we've moved on, and we are completely capable, as you can see from the shows.
Yes.
So I'm here to learn some things. We still have quite a few legacy systems. What I have worked on, in fact, I came over from the CIA to the Bureau to help them with Sentinel. And if you know about VCF, if you've read anything about that, now 12 years ago, that's pretty shocking to me. It felt like 12 years when I was in the 2 years of working for Sentinel. But when we did Sentinel, the first phase of it was all front end. and it was a lot of API calls back to a legacy backend to pull the data. Then fast forward, I moved on to work out at our CJIS division, which is out in West Virginia, and it supports over 18,000 law enforcement agencies across the country. When I got there, they were just in the middle of migrating and updating their biometrics capabilities. So I came at the end of the last 2 phases of that, and we were still at the API calls back to the legacy system. We have since completely migrated and moved off of that. It was a $1.2 billion project that was, by all accounts, very successful. And then I moved on, still at CJIS, and we did if one system wasn't enough, I was there to help them do another system, which was our new NICS, so the firearm background checks had an old, outdated legacy system. We worked to migrate that, and as you can imagine, we had to migrate all of the data. Very painful, very painful. So that was probably the highest risk piece of us going to that new system. Because in our world, and probably in your worlds too, you can't have a lapse in your system not being up, and you can't have a lapse of having accurate, on-demand, on-time data. And so what we haven't quite done in the Bureau yet, and we can talk about that as we go through some of the other questions and in the questions you have, we're slowly moving into the cloud. We're taking baby steps to do that. So everything I've talked about is our on-premise migrations.
Great, thank you. Roger?
Good morning. I feel like an orphan here because I'm a service provider and my customer is here. Yeah, exactly. I think hopefully I can give you guys some nuggets related to modernizing legacy systems. I've been doing this since early 90s with the Air Force, modernizing their budget system, going from mainframe to client server. If you guys remember Power Builder back then, like that was the big thing back in the 90s. To after I left IBM, Air Force, I joined IBM, and then I did a very interesting gigs with one of the rental car companies, the one that has to really try hard. We try harder than not. Okay. I helped them modernize their reservation system, and also worked with a number of drug store chains. And then when I joined the SIC, I helped government modernize their system. So it's very short. I know today is very short. We don't have a lot of time. So then I want to give you some nuggets. The first thing is, this is in my humble opinion, I believe that the legacy system modernization is not a one-time event, but it's an ongoing process. You know the saying, the only thing that's constant is change. You know who said that, by the way? So it's a Greek philosopher, Heraclitus. Okay, look him up. So anyway, I believe that that principle applies to modernizing legacy systems. It's an ongoing process, and the change comes in 2 forms. Obviously, one is in a business, right? And then second one is the technology, in particular, system architecture. The business-wise, fundamentally, we talk about the same thing. We all want to serve customers better, cheaper, faster. Okay? Requirements comes in different forms, but fundamentally, it's pretty much the same. But then question is, technically, how do you enable that? How do you do it cheaper, faster, quicker? And the secret sauce is system architecture. When you look at back in mainframe world, right? And when the cloud server came about, what was it about? Well, that was going from hosting 1-tier architecture to 2-tier client server architecture, right? And then when you look at the web, we went from 2-tier to 3-tier or N-tier, where we have a server, we have in the middle we have some business logic running, they have a client, right? And in between we may have some other tiers. And then now we are to what's called the MSA, microservices architecture. And So as IT professionals, question is, how do you best handle the change that is constant? And when I looked at all different architectures, there are some basic concepts that's been around for at least for 30 years. And that is, when we develop a system, we want to develop in such a way that's loosely coupled, meaning, don't write your code as one monolithic way. And when you write code, make sure it's cohesive, meaning make sure your modules do the consistently same thing, okay? And then you have things like reuse. You'll be able to use these things, right? So these concepts have been around since mainframe days. And that concept still applies to microservice architecture. Okay? The difference is how you make that happen more easily. And that's where the containers come in. In the past, even though we wanted to modularize, loosely coupled, do all that, it was very hard to reuse that thing across the enterprise. But what's enabling now with MSA, Microsoft architecture, is putting your code in the container. If you do that, you can basically use the same container, develop from dev, test, QA to production as is, okay? And be able to reuse as container, not piece of code. So with MSA, it changed really it enabled the basic concepts, loosely coupled, cohesion, reuse, all that. Finally, it is here. And I'm going to be sharing today with this panelist about one of the agents that I was involved in. We actually helped create MSA enterprise-wide. So I'll share that as we go along.
Great, thank you. I also want to just remind you all that for the introverts in the audience, we have a technology-based way to ask questions. It's pigeonhole.at. For the extroverts, there's microphones so you can stand up and be heard. We'd like to make this into a conversation, so we're looking for your questions as well. But with that, I'm going to start on and ask sort of about what the key factors are which are driving the modernization and how you prioritize the modernization efforts, and also what kinds of changes to the organization and to the culture need to be done, in moving towards modernization. And maybe Tarazia, I'll start out with you on that.
Okay, so I guess the biggest driver in my mind, based on what I've seen, is the need for modernized platforms. The missions are evolving, and as you all know, the federal government has gone through its own evolution. We have new requirements popping out every day based on the citizenry and what's happening in the communities that we serve. We cannot seem to keep up with those requirements. So what we've seen is that there's a need to get the new technology out there. Our mission owners are running out, they're talking to technology vendors and bring this new capability in. But we can't deploy it in an environment that is not really set up to do that. We have a lot of mainframes in a lot of our civilian agencies, and so what we've seen is we've got to really look at the change management aspect of those things. And so when you look at the mission of evolution and then you look at your dollars, what's available, how do you balance that out and still make your customers, get them to a place of happiness, right? Where you're actually giving them more capability than they can get today. So a big part of it is not just investing in the technology, but really understanding the mission drivers for those changes and figuring out how you can leverage what you have today, using new terms, new techniques to be able to see how you can take legacy data in an antiquated system and actually make it available in an updated, modernized platform. And that's a big part of what we're seeing is re-engineering, re-architecting, really looking at different ways to take that data from that old container or that old thinking to a new platform. So that's what I think is driving us today. The other is cost. And what we've seen, as I mentioned this in my opening comments, is that many of the federal budgets are actually being reduced over the years. And we've seen that in this budget cycle under our new administration, where we've seen a reduction in dollars. But the O&M budgets continue to sort of creep up there because we changed the name, right? We call it O&M, but then we say it's sustainment. really just going to add a different capability onto that. But what it really is O&M. The new investment dollars are going down significantly, and many of the agencies are in the mentality like, well, I've got new investment dollars, I can buy new capability, without looking at their O&M environment and saying, how do I take it to the next level? How do I leverage what I have to the next level? So that's a big part of it, is looking at the cost activities as well.
I'd like to contribute to that a little bit. So in the case of FAA and the example I provided around unmanned aerial systems, the driver for us for modernization is really the public pressure, the public need for aeronautical data to do safe and efficient unmanned flight. And how does that mesh with air traffic and manned flight, right? As UAS starts to evolve and grow, you got small, low altitude flights, you've got airline flights, you got military flights, you got law enforcement needs in terms of UAS. There's a lot of applications there. So that's a primary driver for us to modernize our IT systems. So it's really mission driven.
Yep.
So I'd like to touch on the piece of that question that talks about prioritization. I think we struggle some with that. But what I would tell you is, for us, it maybe is a little bit more simplified. Most of our systems are on a classified environment. So we are looking at, and not all of that information is classified, of course. And not all those systems need to be necessarily on a classified environment. So what we are looking at is our least risk-based systems, right? Those that don't hold sort of keys to the kingdom and don't hold that kind of data, we are looking to migrate some of that over. Another criteria we're looking at and using is, if we're going to do heavy analytics and that information is unclassified, it would be great to use the power of the cloud to start running that data and see what we can see. We always talk about, and for the last however many, a decade or more, we've talked about connecting the dots. I think for us to buy the iron is not cost effective. We run at least 3 classifications, and we run the infrastructure for all 3 of those. To continue to try to keep up with the cloud and those infrastructures and the horsepower behind those to do some of the analytics we need to do is absolutely not cost effective, right? And it doesn't make sense. And the other piece that I would tell you is and you've got to take this, I think, very seriously, because it's about your workforce. At some point, you need to reinvent your workforce. If you don't have the stable of infrastructure people that you have to have anymore, you've got to start thinking about, what do you do with them? And how do you reinvent the IT organization within your organization to now give more power and more capability to your customers? So, and I think the cloud enables that.
I agree.
We can retrain people, we can do all kinds of things. So that's things we're looking at.
Excellent point.
And so sort of following along on that thread of what the challenges are, sort of both the technology challenges, but also the organizational, cultural challenges, right? So maybe, Robert, you could talk a little bit about the challenges either that you have had in the past and overcome, or had in the past and learned from, or foresee in the future.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, the challenge with modernization, I think everyone that are technologists and engineers, they love the space, right? You present a problem, we'll pick it apart, we'll analyze it, we'll solve it. For the FAA, and I think hopefully this resonates across the other groups here, is that it's not necessarily technology that impedes us. It's organizational. It's the culture of this data, this system, this application supports my mission within my organization. It's mine. And how do you unlock that from that organization so that the enterprise benefits from it? How do you unlock that so you can do enterprise analytics in the cloud and you can see more information or results from combining those data sets with the power of the cloud, for example? And that's been a lot of the challenges that we've been faced with. And it's not necessarily IT. And the way that we've approached the problem is within the CIO's office. We've opened up and we've got a CDO's office now in conjunction with the DOT, and that's helped a lot. The other thing is socializing some of the data governance concepts across the groups using industry practices with COIs and SCOPs. communities of practice and that kind of thing, and socialize the concepts of open data, securely open data, and knowing who has access to your data, because a lot of times we see data transition throughout the organization in secondary and tertiary hands, and by the time it gets to the third or fourth layer, we don't know who's got the data and what they're using it for. So the intent here is we're looking at architecting systems and data access through as a service, so we can control that data and know who's got that data and what they're using it for. And that's the way we've approached the problem.
Absolutely, and I'll add to that I think it's just very smart what you just described. What we're challenged with, and you touched on this, is that many of the systems that we've seen in the legacy arena are owned by a particular organizational entity. And even our mainframes, we have a financial mainframe at one of the agencies I work for, and it was owned by the CFO. When we talked about the data that actually was invested, inside that mainframe, it belonged to 10 different organizations, not just the financial data. So when you talk about who owns the data, you get into this big diatribe about that. And when you talk about modernizing that data and moving it to a new platform, it becomes a war of the worlds, right? So a big part of our strategy, which is very similar to yours, is to focus on data, because the data actually should be an enterprise asset. And in many organizations, we haven't made that leap yet. We have the Data Act, we have a lot of policies that have been issued along this realm, but we haven't taken the action to say data does not belong to the individual or the individual agency entity, it belongs to the corporation, meaning the enterprise. And once you make that leap, then you can actually exercise the right policies around data access and data migration and data quality and all of those kinds of attributes.
Only one other thing I would add for us is we're challenged and struggle with, I'm going to throw out some buzzwords, right? TCO and ROI on going to the cloud. I think, and I should have said this in my last response, but one of the other things that we are concerned about is I/O. So transactions of data coming in and out of the cloud to our partners, what's the cost of that? And we have begun to learn through discussing this with some of the cloud providers that we are not as heavily high transaction oriented as some businesses. So what does that do for the whole community? Are people concerned about those kinds of ticket prices? And for us, with a fiscal bounded budget, we sort of almost need fixed cost. So how to pay for that as we learn that we're chewing up more resources in the cloud that we now have to pay for. When does that bill come due, and how do we pay that? And so that is a concern for us.
Okay, so let's dig in a little bit more on sort of those strategies and tactics. And what I wanted to talk about sort of also is this, when you're modernizing a large system, like do you modernize all of it? Like do you start at the data side, and what are the sort of strategies and tactics that you use or have plans to use to actually, transform these large systems while they're in flight, right? Because you still have to provide the services. You can't take the stuff down. So you have to be able to sort of like changing something from a 747 to a Super Cub as you fly across the country. Like, how does one actually do that? Roger, do you want to start with that one?
Sure, yeah. We all know about enterprise architecture, right? So there's a principle when you modernize that you should be wearing enterprise architect's hat while you work like solution people, meaning implementation people. Okay, I say that because when you modernize, you want to leverage the principles of EA. So starting out with making sure the drivers that's going to be driving your solution is aligned with your business objectives, goals, objectives, to creating target architecture, to creating a roadmap that you use to execute. Because you're not going to, typical enterprise, it's going to take a while to modernize the entire systems, right? So having this, requirements alignment and target architecture and the roadmap, that comes from EA world. Okay. So when we modernize, we gotta make sure that's in place, and then we surgically start identifying the systems that makes most sense to modernize based on what the business drivers are. So, and standardization used to be a big thing, right? Standardize your programming languages, standardize your platforms. Guess what? And what did they really buy you by doing so? Well, our hands got a little handcuffed in it. But I can only use this set of tool when there are other tools that can help me do better, right? Yeah. So this is where like API and wrapping containers come in, and data virtualization, that we no longer have to build a humongous data warehouse. I mean, maybe except for FBI. But I mean physical data warehouses. So we need to really think about embracing heterogeneous environment. Homogeneous environment is not realistic because things move too fast. Okay? So the question is, how do I embrace my heterogeneous environment? And some of the key things is APIs. If you can containerize your existing system and expose API with protocol that's standard, things like SOAP, REST, and messaging, right? That it does not matter what you use to develop that module. It could be COBOL, it could be Fortran, it could be Java, as long as you expose API. The second thing is, like I said, the data virtualization. That there are products, number of products out there. CA has one, IBM, and so forth. That allows you to create, that provide a seamless database, that virtual database that pulls data from multiple places. That'll appear as if it's coming from one source to your end users, right? So things like the API, data virtualization, and also containers. These are some of the key fundamental technologies that we need to really apply when we modernize. And like I said, wear your EA hat, but when you implement, surgically identify what you want to do and apply these technologies.
One more comment. One of the things that the government is now looking to do is something called Technology Business Management. How many of you have heard of TBM? So Technology Business Management is a driver that OMB is now working with the agencies on, particularly as part of the 2019 budget. And what it's really focused on, to the great points that have been made by the panelists here, is determining the cost of IT, and really focused on categorizing those things into cost buckets that would allow you to see where you're spending your money, where your functions are, so that then when you begin to modernize those things, you know where the money is and you know what capabilities you're talking about. So it allows you to sort of dice and slice your O&M environment in many ways. So I would ask you to look that up, because it's also a very helpful tool, and that's what HUD is using right now to prioritize what they're choosing to modernize or not. It's based on the cost structure and where they're spending the most money. Mainframes are certainly at the top of that list, but looking at how we would then technically take that data and make it accessible in a new user interface and a new platform.
How is that any different from, how is the difference between that and a combination of a scaled down CPIC with using a TCO?
So it's
Tracy, can you repeat that question since you didn't tell
I'm
Mike?
sorry.
It's a little hard for, I think, others to hear in the back.
Yeah,
I
go
want to
ahead.
know how this new methodology is different from a combination of a TCO with a scaled down CPIC.
Yeah, it's very related. A lot of it is just call it something different, like we do sometimes in government, sometimes. But in this example, what we're trying to do is standardize across all federal sector the cost of IT. So it's not about the CPIC process. It's not about any of our budget formulation sort of activities. It's more about determining the cost, getting to the cost of doing business. So you can actually create an ROI at the end of the day. So it's taking a commercial model and applying it to the government, and that's what they tout it to be. But I'd say look at it. There are some relationships to those things that we do today, but it is a different take on it for a different outcome, I would say.
So questions from the floor. Anna has the microphone, and I am watching for the introverts to use technology to ask their question. Questions?
Thank you.
I have a quick question for you.
Let's just speak in the mic so it can get on the camera.
So my question is, how is government unifying their approach to the cloud? Everything still feels pretty vertically based. Each agency is spinning up multiple clouds. Is there anything in the future to try to combine resources and share resources across, just even within a single agency, never mind across the government?
So within the DOJ, I mean, we are looking at that. And I think in some ways there's a couple of agencies probably leading the way. I mean, ATF has been in Office 365 for quite a long time, and then they brought other agencies in the department along with them. So we're seeing that. I think one of the ways we're doing it is through contract vehicles. So we're almost working in tandem with the department to set up umbrella contracts that all of the agencies can then use. So whether that's, and there probably will be multiple award, because you won't use Amazon for certain things that you might use Microsoft and that you might use Google. And so, they do different things and they're geared for doing different things. So we're probably going to see those kinds of umbrella contracts where, IDIQs or something to that, BPAs. I don't know how they're going to be structured, but that's one way we're doing it.
Do you think that follow-on RFPs would say, you have to fit into this cloud architecture for certain things so that we're not spinning up a second Amazon, a third Microsoft?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a tricky question because we actually are spinning up a second and third Amazon and Microsoft because of our enclaves, right?
Right.
So, they're very good in the unclass world. They are beginning to say they need to model in the other enclaves, and not all of the agencies in the department need those enclaves. So on the classified side, we are teaming up with the intelligence community to get classified cloud instances from still the same companies, because our belief is, one, they build data centers better than we do, faster than we do. They have the capital to do it. They can get skiffed pretty quickly, and then they can keep up with the current technology, and they will want to if they want our business.
So if I can comment on that one too, there's been a lot of talk about private clouds and shared clouds across the government. OMB's talked about it for quite some time when we first started the buzzword about cloud, right? Everything should go to cloud. But what I think we've learned is that, as you said, it's enclave, so it depends on what the client is and what the data sensitivity is. But one of the things that I know that 18F out of GSA are looking at shared capabilities across the federal space. So I know they're looking at that, and I know they always are looking for ideas and suggestions about how to make that a relevant capability for the federal government. So I'd ask you to follow up those smart guys over there, and I think they're trying to do great things.
Well, I'm all excited about the cloud, but as a citizen too, it's two things.
Yeah.
Do I want everything there?
Yep.
So I would add too, and I just thought of this because it out at CGIS there's a capability called Index, and through that we've allowed agencies to share data without sharing data, if that makes any sense. So you kind of can do a search, and you may get back just a header that says contact so and so because there is an actual hit. It may be silent in the sense that the law enforcement partner that put the information in may get a hit, and then they may want to call you. But what I'm hoping is, if we can get everybody, at least, let's just say the intelligence community, if they get into a classified cloud, and even if today it's siloed, eventually we may develop capabilities where we can search the totality and really use the power of the cloud. That's why the unclassified cloud, to me, excites me. Because there's a lot more data, open source data, than we can necessarily get our hands on or search against. And so if we can search our data in a pool with other data, even if we don't get the full data set back, at least we were aware of it. And before, we would not have been aware of it.
Analyst heaven is what you're describing.
It is, yes.
Analyst heaven.
All right, well, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Talking about data, Robert, you talked about your CDO or Chief Data Officer, and one of the big challenges always is about the data. Can you talk a little bit about what each of your organizations is doing about the data, cleansing it, moving it forward into a more unified environment and that type of thing?
Yeah, so with the FAA, I think when I hear some of the other panelists' comments, like Jeremy's, I think FAA is probably a few years back from where they are in terms of modernization. We are looking at API access at the data layers at our legacy systems while we parallelly modernize our to new systems. In terms of data cleansing, that's where our modernizations of the new applications come into play, because we'll start to move the data into these authoritative sources of data for certain subject areas. And because a lot of our data, they're combined with other data sets depending on that organization's mission. But the intent here is to get to authoritative sources of data sets with the applications on top of them, and then provide data access to those new systems in modern formats, GeoJSONs and things like that. And in terms of data quality, that's the challenge. The authoritative source, we identify a COI who has the community that has interest in that data, as well as specifying who's the steward of that data, responsibility to maintain quality of that data. So that's where the CDO's office and our governance boards come into play to ensure that those communities that receive that data are receiving quality data from the stewards.
We're not doing anything. I'm just kidding. We're talking about it. We've got thank God for the Data Act, which actually got resources aligned to the data issue. But I'm going to show my age and say, when I first started this journey with the IRS 30 years ago, we were talking about CRUD matrices. If anybody's old enough to remember what those are, I love you. Thank you for being my kindred spirit. Because we really started looking at breaking down data during that domain using, what was it, the something Martin model or something. We're still in the same dilemma about data because it's such an amorphous thing. And so I think the model you've described is such a positive one where you can actually categorize it in COIs and begin to break it down in terms of value and quality. And if I were queen for a day, that's what I would suggest that many of the agencies do. Kudos to you.
Thank you.
We just recently, months ago now, hired a chief data officer, finally. And one of the things that she did was she held a data summit. And she had all these groups come in, and they presented in front of each other and began to realize that they had duplicate data in some cases, that there was no standard nomenclature for some things. Agency names, why are those not standard across the organization? So it's those kinds of things. But I think I didn't attend. I wasn't able to attend. But I heard great things about it. It opened the eyes of people. Because look, if you're like us, you have shadow IT. And it's just, and so she was able to expose some of that and bring some of that out, probably not all of it, but at least some of it. And we began to see, and then we could also talk, I think also talked about authoritative sources. And so, did you even know you could pull from this? You don't even need to create that data. Oh, had no idea. All right, so something like that might work.
One thing to add to that I forgot to mention is with quality, what helps with that, what we found that helps with that is discovery of the data. You mentioned that, is that if a member of the organization that can discover there's another data asset out there and can communicate to the data owner that there's quality issues, that helps drive organically quality of the data through its use. And that's kind of where we've got a data catalog to where it's available to the enterprise. And it lists those things. In some cases, you just get a hit, but it tells you who's the owner of that data, where to contact if you have any issues. And in some cases, it's open access, right? It's full transparency. You can pull that data down through APIs or down through Excel spreadsheets or whatnot. But discovery is key to help expose quality issues.
Last question.
All right, my experience is with DoD. And so when we're trying to see data, we have to put in our CAC card. And oftentimes, even within our own agency, we can't see something because we don't have certain permissions, whether it's on SharePoint or some shared drive. Last year, the DoD CIO, Mr. Davis, said they were going to get rid of CAC cards. How are you going to be protecting data in the cloud when our primary means of protection is, I know who you are via a CAC card or something, and that's now going to go away? How are you going to protect your data but make it available?
Wow.
Everybody's looking at me, I think, because I guess I'm the security in the group. But so I don't know if I have a straight answer for you, because we have lagged behind in going to those kinds of two-factor. I mean, we use cards and to get in to several of our enclaves. We use RSA soft tokens, right? Yeah, very similar, and they're expensive. So, but I think what needs to happen, and I don't quite see it yet, I see certain parts of the IT community talking about going to the cloud, and we talk about it in terms of stability, availability, performance, those kinds of things, scalability. I have yet to see security IT groups talking about how we get there securely. And ultimately, all those worlds need to blend.
Right.
You need to have your developers, your engineers, they've all got to be security trained to do that. But if you think about it, and I often reference this to our teams, the banking industry has been protecting data for a very long time. Now, I'm sure there's things most of us don't know about that happen in those industries. But think about it. They're not worried about a jailbroke phone. They're not as worried about some of the other capabilities that people have on an end device. And they're not issuing end devices, right? We tend to issue, take this model, and this is what you're going to use. So I think there's got to be as we have done for 30, 40 years, it's this layering of security, and we've got to find different mechanisms. And look, industry's driving quite a bit of this, frankly. I used to say in the agency, at some point, and I say it now in the Bureau, at some point, manufacturers are not going to put an Ethernet card on their motherboard or one that you can separately buy. It's going to be wireless. What are we doing to get ready for wireless? So what are we doing to get ready for the fact that industry is driving to biometrics in most cases, or some other mechanisms, right, beyond physical device necessarily, or a password? And if you look across government, many of the government agencies are still in password mode because it's expensive. We've got to put our money toward other things, and I think that's the struggle. But if we let industry drive some of that and we get on board, we haven't yet figured out that they have a vested interest in it, in security. Like if you go to the cloud and you go to a cloud vendor, can you imagine if the FBI's information on one of those cloud providers is somehow hacked or is somehow something is extracted? They will lose all credibility with their commercial partners and individual people who buy their services, right? They, in some ways, can't afford as much as we can't afford to have a security breakdown. So in some ways, I'd almost like to say, let industry drive us to where we need to be, and follow suit. I mean, they'll build it in.
And if I may add to that, you do online banking, right? Do you use CAD card?
I don't do online banking.
Okay, good for you.
Because between OPM, the Equifax, and a recent DFAS, which is Defense Finance and Accounting Service,
I understand.
data was published that I had died and my social security number was given to somebody else.
Wow.
Yeah, I get
Wow.
it.
So this is it's a really awesome conversation, but I think we're actually at the end of our time at this point. So we're going to need to wrap up, and perhaps we could thank the esteemed panel here for all of their insight. And I encourage you to continue the conversation afterwards. Thank you all very much.
Well, how about a round for Deborah?
Yes.